Hi everyone, it's Henry here and welcome to the next video in our ongoing Infinity series where I am continuing to paint up the JSA portion of the Operation Sandtrap box that Corvus sent through to us for review. So they are sponsoring this video. If you saw the Hatamoto video I did a couple of weeks ago, you know I am really enjoying working on these miniatures. It's lovely to work in a different setting to what I normally hobby in, but also just a completely different style of miniatures, what I often spend my days painting. So next up on the list was the Raiden. This is the guy with the rocket launcher, and it gave me a great opportunity to essentially define all the different colours that I would be spreading out across the collection in differing amounts on differing models. So I wanted to focus in on the red on this one, and thanks to a question from someone in the comments on the Hatamoto video, I thought I'd address how I would do a different coloured cloth. And I'm going to touch a little bit on something I think that we all do when we get excited about a project. We'll chat about that at the end. Let's paint. So I start the model off with a simple pre-shade or a simple zenithal highlight, you might call it, where essentially we spray white paint on the model from above. I'm going to use our signature series Infinity by Harder and Steenbeck because, well, I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? That's a wicked airbrush. And I'm spraying Tamiya XF2, that's flat white, so I've thinned it with Tamiya X20A thinner, about 3 to 4 parts thinner to paint, so really quite a dilute mix. And I just build up those layers of white. And this is not necessarily to act like a particularly strong pre-shade, it's just to help me identify various areas of the model. I'm really not going to use my airbrush much for the rest of the whole process. I just didn't feel it helped me that much with the style in which I was painting. So you can see black, white over black. And that's what I was going to do. Now, someone in the comments asked, I did black cloth on the last trousers, and they asked, oh, how would you go about doing like a beige cloth? So I felt, well, it's a good opportunity to show you. I wanted to use a sort of slightly green-brown base, and whilst I would normally use that Gobi brown paint from scale 75, I don't particularly like using it for large areas. It's got a very, very matte finish to it. It makes it quite difficult to get a nice smooth base coat. So I've mixed up a very similar colour using a couple of Citadel paints there. And just a couple of thin coats applied. Moving the brush, nice large brush. Considering all the brush strokes, try not to leave any visible ones in the surface, and a nice smooth base coat to work from. And the reason for this is because we are going to apply just the way we did the black trousers. I want to use a contrast paint. So I want to have the shadow colour showing through when I apply the contrast paint over the pre-highlight. So as you know, I prepped the model before as if it was black, but this is how I would do it if I wanted to do the tan. So base coat in the brown, and then just go in and do exactly the same process with the flat white. This might seem laborious. This might seem an unusual approach when I'm, to airbrush, then go back to your brush, then go back in with the airbrush and stuff, but because I wanted to match what I'd done on the previous trousers, and because it's just one miniature, it's taking me all of 2 minutes to load the brush up and do this with, it just felt like a very natural part of the process to go through with it. I was going to use Skeleton Horde. 2 reasons. It's really pale once you thin it down, which is great because I didn't want this to be a particularly strong colour, and I've already used that colour for the Ivory armour on the Hatamoto miniature, and therefore other Ivory armour plates that I'm going to use across the collection. So whenever I'm doing a sort of gaming project, I like to have a fairly tight selection of paints that I work from. I think it helps bring sort of continuity and harmony across the miniatures. But there's no reason not to use them on these different surfaces. So you can see here, even just one really thin down, and I'm talking probably 4 parts water to paint here, 1 coat over them, we're already starting to get that similar effect that we got when we used the black over the Hatamoto. And now I go in and just do another coat. Nice and simple. Again, just not slopping anything on, trying to be quite considered with everything we do. Now, the other big change on this model was going to be red being a main focus of the armour colour. I did a few bits and bobs, little dashes of red on the last one, but nothing particularly significant. And I wanted to try and paint it in exactly the same manner that I painted the Hatamoto in, which is that sort of scratchy, don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm having a ton of fun doing it style. And I thought, right, let's see what we can do with red when we do that. And rather than use a test model to try it out on, I just thought, just do the shoulder on this. If it looks rubbish, I can always paint over it and figure out a different way of doing it. test models are great, and if you've seen my recent Deathkorps project, you know, quite important. But sometimes you just need to crack on and get going, right? So a shoulder pad was absolutely fine. So I wanted a nice dark base coat to work from, just sort of off black, really. So I've mixed a little black into that Vorbak red. It's giving me that lovely deep sort of burgundy base coat to work from. And now I'm just going to start mixing Mephiston Red into that. So this first layer I'm putting on here is, I don't know, 90% Mephiston with a tiny bit of that that base coat colour in there. And here, as you see, I'm just doing lots and lots of little scratches to essentially place the highlights and the colour where I think they would be if the light was shining on the model more or less from above. So that pre-shade's just giving me a nice little guideline. I left this bit in real time because I think it's useful to see. I've thinned the paint probably at least 50-50 with water on my wet palette. So the mix that I'm applying is quite dilute, which means I don't want to have too much on my brush because it will just wash off and pool and we'll get those horrible tide marks. But a plus point is it will be nice and see-through, so nice and translucent, so we can build these layers of scratches up and create a bit of interest on the model. But also, it dries really quickly. So if you're going to work on a couple of different armour panels, by the time you finish the last one, the first one should be dry enough and good to go with all over again. And each time I go back, I'm now probably, this is what, the second or third coat I've applied to this one. Now I'm probably working up just a pure Mephiston Red. And the reason I'm using those little mixes in between is just to, I'm not going to go back in and do any glazing here to blend the colours at all. So having those slight in-between mixes, and they don't need to be mega specific, just a little bit of the previous colour in the mix for that sort of one additional layer can just help blend those colours together a bit more pleasingly. And you can see how much more intense we're now getting with the red. Now we've moved up to that pure Mephiston, and this is what the fourth layer of paint that's gone on the model. Because we are using quite a few layers of paint, it is important that we keep it relatively dilute, so a relatively thin mix of paint. So what we don't want to do is build up physical texture, or I don't want to do is build up physical texture on the miniature because I don't think that looks particularly nice. But we do want to build up loads of texture by painting all these scratches and scratches in. So here I've added Wildrider Red into it. Why did I choose Wildrider Red? Well, I didn't want the red to be particularly orange. But this has a sort of nice balance between being a nice bit brighter than the Mephiston, but also not going too far into that sort of orange spectrum with the red. So we mix in the Wildrider. So this is probably 75% Wildrider to 25% Mephiston, something like that. Just because I wasn't quite sure how far I wanted to go with it, as I say, because I didn't want it to turn too orange. So as the test panel, I was like, you know what? That's not bad. I can live with that. So now it's time to go in and do all the other red on the miniature. I've got to say, one of the things I've enjoyed most about these Infinity miniatures so far that I've painted them is that they've essentially been one session paint jobs. And what I've done with this Raider is I'm starting to paint it in between other projects. And because the miniature is so different to what I normally paint, and because the style is quite different to how I normally paint, it's remarkable what a sort of freeing, motivating, energizing kind of process it can be, because you're getting tons of sort of positive feedback from it, from yourself, because you're completing things. I'm enjoying discovering new ways of painting. Very, very little pressure, and you're completing it nice and quickly, which is great from the point of view. We all know what it's like trying to get, even a gang of say 10 models done takes a while. But working on them individually like this, and when the models are so individual, like they are in your Infinity warbands, it's cracking. So here you can see I put that red highlight in very, very messily, very, very scratchy, or appears to be very messily. I'm just placing it where I think that light would fall, and essentially not worrying about anything else. All the recesses we're just ignoring, so all the different very small panels when they're next to each other, we just ignore those at this stage and we just light that whole shape as one. And if I need to define the panels more, we can do that with the next step, and then later on if we need to with a little pin wash or panel lining process. If the light's going to fall across that shoulder pad, it's not going to worry about where the panels are separate. So once I got that red up to the same level as the shoulder, I went in and started blacking out all the other details, partly in preparation for painting them, but also just to help me look at the miniature. Again, when I find a miniature that I'm not that familiar with, I find little things like the zenithal, the painting the bits black, I just find it much easier to see the model. So having looked at him now, I'm like, oh yeah, do you know what? I think I do want to punch that red up, you know, a little bit more. So here I'm going in with the pure Wildrider, and I'm just working on some of the edges, not all the edges. This isn't edge highlighting where I work around every single panel line. This is just some sort of tippy-tappy, little scratches, bit of chipping, but it's not meant to be battle damage. This is just the style in which I'm choosing to paint this miniature. And I'm definitely going to pursue it. It's something I've thoroughly enjoyed the process of, but now I would like to learn a bit more about how far I can take it. So I'm going to look around, see what other artists there are out there who use this quite a lot, study what they're doing, and see what I can draw from that for myself to improve, you know, the enjoyment levels and the results that I can get with it. But definitely that different style for like a small separate project, it's just great. It's just so little pressure. Honestly, these Infinity miniatures have been a absolute sort of, not lifesaver, that's a bit dramatic, but they've come at a really good time with various projects we've got on. And once I'd got that painted up, I decided, no, the helmet does need to be red as well. I wasn't sure, that's why I'd left it. So again, once I got a few more colours on the model, it was really, really useful. Well, not colours, but a few more areas painted on the model. I realised that was important as well. And with regards to where to place the highlights on his helmet, well, it's a sphere, the top of his helmet, so it will have basically a spherical highlight. So I just sort of scratch that in. Now at this point, I went back to his trousers, and this is the skeleton horde again, this time undiluted, and I've just painted it into some of the deeper folds, and those really deep folds that separate it, the sort of things that look like stripes. Just gone in there just to punch that contrast up a little bit more of light and dark on them, just to help define those shapes a bit more. And I've got to say the sculpts on the cloth on these Infinity miniatures have been awesome to do this kind of thing with. They just take the paint brilliantly, and it's such little effort, I think, to get a really lovely looking gaming piece. And by that I mean something that I enjoy looking at when I'm holding it in my hand, but also that I enjoy looking at it when it's on the desk or it's on the, you know, on the gaming board. For the black, this is exactly the same as I painted on the Hatamoto. So I base coated it black. I used Corvus Black to do my first amount of highlights with, a nice sort of blue black. And then I mixed in a little light blue grey here. I think this was pale blue grey. If you don't have it, just mix, you know, blue and white and grey or whatever until you get one you like. And that was because I thought that would be nice against the red that are on the miniatures, and exactly the same process. I don't want to go over too much in this video of the stuff I did on the Hatamoto. But I also, you know, I wanted to be a fairly complete standalone video as well. And the reason I've left the actual visor of the helmet black is so that later on, when we get to those magenta lenses, they just show up a little bit better, I think, than they would if they were straight over the red. This guy's got quite a lot of the leather pouches on him, which is great. I said before, this is a go-to recipe for me, these two colours, Thondia and Steel Legion Drab. I really like the jump between the two of them, and I think for just two paints you get this lovely sort of thing that reads as leather on the miniature, but also in this context provides a nice little sort of area of relief, separating those big areas of red on the miniature out. And again, this whole thing is very loose painting, right? I'm sort of not worrying about painting it to look like leather, just highlighting the areas I think would be highlighted. For his rocket launcher, I've gone for that same green. I really like doing the weapons green on these guys. I think it's a nice little additional colour to pop in there. And again, I think it kind of fits in with the style of the universe, you know, that kind of sort of slightly more modern military aesthetic. So we just use, again, the darker green, then the lighter green, mix the two first, and then we move up to just the light green on its own. And you see here, I'm treating the rocket launcher just as one long tube. So that highlight's going to run from the bottom of it all the way along the top to the other end of it. Ignoring all those little recesses and stuff, they don't matter. And at this point, I thought, it might be quite fun, paint a couple of stripes or something on it, because it's quite a large area of green, and it's not typically something I paint that way. The weapons, all that one sort of flat colour. I just thought it needed something a little extra to make me happy looking at it. So I thought a couple of yellow stripes do the job. So I go in, tap the stripes out with some white I don't try and do them in like a nice smooth line. I just tippy tap them. So if there's a bit of texture and they look a bit off-centered, it doesn't really matter. Kind of looks deliberate, right? And then just use a nice contrast yellow there over the top to give me the color. That's my go-to way for doing sort of yellow stripes is white and then a contrast yellow of choice. And I chose quite an orangey one there, just because I fancied it. It's one I really like using. And I'm trying again with all of my gaming miniatures at the moment to try and provide some areas of slightly punchy color, just so they look a bit more interesting on the tabletop. Then for all the areas of what I have decided are chainmail, I'm not entirely sure they are on this guy. I think they were on the Hatamoto. I'm not entirely sure they are on the Raiden model. Particularly, I don't care because I think this looks cool. I love that sort of, I love metallics for gaming miniatures. I think it's huge bang for your buck. But also, I just like the vibe it gives in the mini. These things are so clearly inspired, aren't they, by sort of feudal Japanese type stuff. I think it's quite fun having very, very sci-fi stuff next to sort of very old school armor. And again, I wasn't quite sure what to paint the handles on his swords here. And then I thought, well, I've got these 2 areas of yellow on the rocket launcher. Let's make a 3rd area so we get a little triangle of colour. We know the sort of that works from a theory point of view. So I thought, okay, well, let's go in with the Iyanden Yellow. And it was possibly a little bit too much, a bit bright for me. So all I've done is mixed in a little bit of white with that. And I am highlighting them here, but I'm also basically just using this to dull them down a little bit. By adding that white in, we're going to, oh my goodness, my mind's gone blank. We're going to desaturate that yellow a little bit and just knock it back a touch. Perhaps a bit too full on, but I'm not worried about it. It's cool. It's cool enough. And now we're up to the sort of the finishing touches on the model. So I just want to create a nice oil wash, a little bit of dirt and grime for things like the metallics. I'm using sepia, so the same I used on the Hatamoto. I thinned it 50-50 with normal mineral spirits from the DIY store. These are stinky, but they do dry quick, so they're great for filming. If I was doing this myself, in a more relaxed manner, I would use something like Sansador by Winsor Newton, which is an artist-grade odorless thinner. It's much nicer to work with. But for this process, these are the right ones to use. And as I say, I'm washing it all over the chainmail because it gives us a very nice effect. And then I will sparingly just wash it into a few other areas where I think we could put a bit of dirt and grime and also just bring a little bit more definition between certain panels. Didn't mention it earlier, but the silver I used was very deliberate. And I talk about that more in the Hatamoto video. So if there's anything in this you feel like I've skipped over quite quickly, please go and watch that Hatamoto video because I will cover them in more detail. So I didn't want to do tons of repetition. That's such a cool model. It's been great, like looking at the ranges and seeing what's like I say. I haven't really paid attention to Infinity for like 5 years, something like that. So it's really cool to see what's come out in between. The basing, I've just used a texture paste by AK. It's their dry ground, and then I'm using this English uniform colour over the top because Sandy, Operation Sandtrap. I felt we had to put them in the desert. For this. Thin it down, wash it over, bit of powder, so covered elsewhere. Now the lenses, I'm going to pop this process in again because I think it's worth talking about. We're going to use a white ink here. Reason we're going to use the white ink, it will wash itself very easily into these teeny tiny little divots where I guess the lenses are. And because of that super high gloss finish it's got, that's why it runs in there so easily for that sort of application where we want the white to punch through from underneath, but also be very thin. Ink is fantastic to use. If I just thinned down a white paint, it would break up and it wouldn't give us such a punch of white underneath the magenta. So again, that's why I've specifically used white ink in this instance. And then it's the Doomfire Magenta over the top to give us some nice, pretty funky looking lenses. So yeah, the thing I wanted to talk about that we all do when we get excited about a project, we start going and buying other things. So I went and picked up a tag for these guys because I thought it looked really cool. Can't remember the name off the top of my head. And it came through and I wanted to talk about it in the video basically because the quality of this cast was unreal. It's a plasticky, a resin of some sort. Barely any cleanup to do at all. There was no instructions, but it went together very obviously what went where. A handful of tiny mould lines, tiniest bit of flash. I genuinely think it's one of the best things I've ever built in 20, 30 years of doing the hobby. I just can't believe it. I wish every single model Corvus Belli produced was in this material, because it's absolutely stunning. And I mean, it went together in like 15 minutes, something like that, out the box. You know, and it's probably a good 10 to 15 parts, but it's just such a cool mini as well. Look at it, look at the size, and it brings the tags are awesome. I will try and be disciplined and finish all the infantry miniatures first before getting to it, but I can't promise. But Andy's also done the same for his Pano. He's gone and bought one as well, and he's loving it. So I think we will probably go and paint these over on Patreon over the next few months, if you guys would like to see it. So yeah, do let us know sort of in the comments if you fancy a tag off, as it were. Yeah, and here he is, all done next to his chum. Just loving how this project's going. And as I say, I think that's how I'm going to continue painting them, is in between other stuff. You know, a nice little sort of evening hobby session, palette cleanser. It's a simple, fairly sketchy process of painting them. I've done 2 here. I think they look right next to each other. I think they make sense next to each other. They look like they've been done in the same style. I've covered every single colour I'm going to want to use across all the rest of the miniatures. So I've got all my recipes. I know exactly what I'm doing with all of that. So yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this Infinity content. Please let me know down in the comments if you would like to see us touch on some of the other factions, of which there's a bunch more now than when I was last doing it, which is really, really fun as well. Also today, whilst I was looking for a photo of that tag to drop into the video, saw another tag for the JSA, which has got some little pandas. So yeah, I didn't need a new project. I really didn't. But I think if it can be as relaxed and fun as these have been so far, then there's no harm in doing that, right? So yeah, any questions about anything I've done in the video or the Hatamoto one, please pop them down in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks ever so much for all of your support over on Patreon, but also over here with your likes, subscribes, your comments. It all makes a massive difference and we really appreciate them. Take care, and I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com and maybe Ben can sort you out.